I'll take it.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Freedom. Go ahead, sir.
Lord, thank you for bringing us together again for another day of discussion. Please keep our hearts and minds true to what your word is telling us. Dispel any other thoughts that may lead us off course. And please help your word to speak to us as only you can lead it to. And please keep us focused on the word, Lord. And in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you.
I felt bad for missing the last. I think I've missed the last two studies. I feel bad.
Nah, life happens.
Full disclosure, I was literally just playing video games and lost track of time. It wasn't that I missed it because I had something going on.
You're fine. Look, that happens to even the best of us. All right. So, welcome to Luke 14. We finally made it. Luke 13 was a bit of a bear in a number of fronts, but we've made it to Luke chapter 14. And yeah, looking forward to this. Up to this point, Jesus has been, doing more of his teaching and more of his aggravating of the Pharisees, a lot. And so when we come to Luke chapter 14, Jesus is still doing that, but it's kind of interesting, kind of the dynamic of between Jesus and the Pharisees, because in the first part of this chapter, we see that Jesus is getting he's finding himself in the home of a Pharisee. So, does someone want to take the first 6 verses that are posted up there?
I can do it.
Thank you, ma'am.
Luke 14. One Sabbath, when he went to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees, they were watching him carefully. And behold, there was a man before him who had dropsy. And Jesus responded to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" But they remained silent. And he took him and healed him and sent him away. And he said to them, "Which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on a Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out?" And they could not reply to these things.
Thank you. So, this is fun because we see that Jesus is in the home of a ruler of the Pharisees. Now, given how Jesus has kind of been going along, his interactions with the Pharisees, does this strike you as interesting at all? Like, why was it, in order to go into the home of a Pharisee, he was invited? We'll see later in the chapter that there were a bunch of people that were invited to the home of the Pharisee, and Jesus is one of them. Does it strike you as odd that he's there? That they're like, oh yeah, let's bring in this guy that's done nothing but antagonize us?
I think it could.
Yeah, Cass. Yeah, you might be onto something there. Sorry, Freedom. I think you were saying something.
All good. Yeah, that, and then also, I think some of the Pharisee. I mean, maybe not the leader of the Pharisees, but some of the Pharisees were actually interested in what he had to say.
And that's a good, yeah.
It seems like a lot of the time, they are interested in it, and then group mentality takes over, going, well, that would be against what everyone else thinks, and then they kind of join the group and going, he's evil.
Okay, so let's kind of shed some light on this. So it says that one Sabbath, when he went to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees, it says they were watching him carefully. Now, I think Cass is pretty much on point, because the term watching there, the Greek word is paratereo. And I'll put that in chat. There you go. Paratereo, and it literally means to watch, like, scrutinizingly close, like looking for any kind of slip up. They are, it's almost sinister. It's sinister the way they're watching him. So, yeah, Cass is pretty well on point. They are trying to drag him into a mistake. They are so desperate to discredit this guy and to just paint him in a bad light in any way that they can because he's just upset their entire, you know, religious environment that they're overseeing with all of these teachings and these miracles and everything. So they're like, okay, we're like Hawkeye Vision. The moment he slips up, we call him out because the people just hold him in such high regard. We have to discredit him somehow. And so we see the real mind of the Pharisees here as they are paratereo him. So yeah. Now, Jesus derangement syndrome. All right. And so there's a man here who had dropsy. Now, does anybody know what dropsy is? It's not. It shouldn't be surprising that we see Luke mention this because he's a physician. He's probably familiar with it. But anybody know what dropsy is?
I literally just looked it up while we were.
Okay. Feel free. Share with the class.
It's basically the swelling or puffiness of your joints, particularly in hands, arms, feet, ankles, legs, and yeah, it's pain, just extreme pain. And
yeah, it
expands and yeah, stretching.
So
and, yeah.
According to one commentary, it says it's an abnormal accumulation of serous fluid in the tissues of the body, and it's a disease that swells up the body due to fluids forming in the cavities and tissue. So it makes you look like you're swollen, like you're bloated. Yeah, it is incredibly painful. Now, let's circle back to something that we kind of mentioned in passing. Jesus is invited to the home of this Pharisee. In order to be there, you had to be invited. So this man who has dropsy was invited to this home. Does that seem like something that would typically happen in the home of a Pharisee? It's now known as edema. Okay, interesting. Or however you say that.
The next section would suggest not.
I would agree. Context. Well done. So yeah, this guy is very out of place. And when he's out of place and you combine that with how closely the Pharisees are watching Jesus, you kind of get the feeling that, yeah, Admiral Akbar was in the room. And so Jesus turns to the lawyers and Pharisees saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? This is a very interesting question. What do you guys think? Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?
I think it goes along with what Christ is trying to do throughout pretty much all of the New Testament is not ignoring the law, but adding God into the law to where you're focusing more on what is right and good and rather than what is lawful, sort of a deal.
Okay.
So,
and I don't disagree with that.
I can't help because the law doesn't allow me to.
Right. Yeah. It's
that going. Well, look, God told us to love everyone. We need to do that.
Mm-hmm. I do think you're right. I definitely agree that the religious leaders should come to such a point, like Kess is saying here, that you split hairs and you go down to such minutia about keeping the word of the law without understanding the spirit of the law. There's that, but when looking back on this, there were some very interesting things. So my concordance is in the King James, and when you read it in the King James, whenever it talks about work, it always mentions that you shall do no work on the Sabbath, or you shall do no work on this day, or you shall do no work leading up to this. The word work is a noun. It's never used as a verb. And I found that interesting. So I looked up the word. The Hebrew word is, let me find it in here. Where did it go? Okay, so the Hebrew word, and again, Hebrew is not my strong suit. I believe the pronunciation is Malaka. It's like MLK, Milaka, and I'll just read it straight from my from the concordance. It says, "From the same as," another word, properly deputyship or ministry, like generally employment or work, also property. So when you read it, that you shall do no work, you shall do no employment, or you shall do no property, does that cast it in any kind of a different light?
So in that case, it would be more of you're not allowed to do more jobs or make a profit off of your work. But if you're doing it in a manner of I'm like even like volunteering to paint someone's house. I mean, that's probably not something that they would have had been doing back then. But like
Right.
volunteer to paint houses for homeless or something like that. Okay, yeah, you're working, but you're not getting paid. I don't think that counts.
So again, that's one of those points where you could split hairs and probably go one way or another. What I would think I would say is that you were right on point when you said it's about making a profit. I would agree with that because that's what ties into the employment. When it comes back to property, it's about working to things that you yourself possess. Either think about, like, for me, mowing the lawn, doing yard work, like painting your own fence or something. I would say that also qualifies. Now, it doesn't specifically say your property or that person's property, but property owned by people. The Sabbath was set aside as holy for what purpose? It was holy unto who?
God.
It was holy unto God. And so apart from the other 6 days of the week, the seventh day was set apart to do no work, to profit yourselves, because that is a day set aside for the furtherance and for the focus on God.
I would 100% agree with you. And I just thought about it. Something that backs that up is when that law wasn't really I guess it was in place at that time. Yeah. When the Israelites were in the desert and they were
Wondering.
getting manna from heaven, they were
Yep.
told to collect extra on Saturday or on the day before the Sabbath.
I was
That way-
typing it.
Wavelength, yes.
and yeah, so what she said in her text, yeah,
Exactly.
and so that would have been benefiting them. Yeah, they're not getting paid, but they're getting fed at that
Right.
point. So it's something that's benefiting them. So yeah, okay.
So that's the first half of answering Jesus's question. Here's the second half. Jesus doesn't ask does healing qualify as work?
It's not benefiting you.
You're right. Unless you're a doctor, in which case that's your profession, your employment.
In that case, would it be? I would be interested in if there's a difference in the Hebrew language for healing of like medicine and healing as in like a miracle.
You know what? I looked up. I think I looked up the word and then I forgot to follow through on that. I'm sitting here with my concordance in my lap. Let me look it up. No, wait. I've actually got my concordance on my phone. That's way faster.
Yeah.
Is it lawful to heal? All right. Greek word. Oh, I did look this up. So the Greek word is therapeuo. you guys can probably tell, what word we get from that.
Oh my.
Say it again.
There you go. Therapeuo.
Ah, yes.
You
It
said
literally
therapy.
means therapy, therapeutic, something like that. The ways in which it's translated are in the King James. It's translated as cure, heal, and amazingly, the third word, worship. It's only translated that way once, but it does. But the word worship does appear as a translation of therapeuo. So Jesus asks these lawyers, these scribes, is it lawful to therapeuo on the Sabbath? Oh, Kes, I missed your last comment. I think Isaiah has something to say on the subject. What are you referring to?
I found it. I had to look
Oh,
it up.
okay. All right. I see a couple people typing, and it makes me excited. I think if a doctor allowed a patient to suffer or die because he refused to treat him on the Sabbath, I don't see how that's going to bring people to Christ. Okay. And Jesus will reference that here shortly. That's good foreshadowing, Bob. Good job. Well done.
I think you guys broke it.
I just got burned by a bot. I just got burned by a bot. I'm pretty sure I okayed that when this guy set that up. Oh my gosh. Okay, it's fine. Fine. It's fine. Cool. All right. So, according to everything that I researched, everything that I was looking at, and Cass, you can go ahead and cut me off and interject with your Isaiah comment whenever you're ready. I saw nothing that forbade healing on the Sabbath. And so when Jesus asks the question, because let's face it, Jesus' miracles, for all they didn't appear to be, quote, work. He wasn't doing anything. He'd reach out, touch a person, and the paralytic would stand up. The blind man would see. The demon possessed would be cast out. What work can you claim him of doing? And so it's no wonder that these scribes and Pharisees get asked this question, and they just give them these blank stares like, I don't know, you tell us, hotshot. Because if they say, well, no, it's not, then he's going to respond, well, then why do you guys always, up in arms with me? But if they say, yes, it is, well, then Jesus comes at him like from the other side. Well, then where's your compassion? This call to love, the greatest commandment is to love your neighbor. How does that line up with your interpretation of the law? So what does Jesus do? They stay quiet, and so he's like, all right, look, fine. We'll just let this play itself out. So he took him, and he healed him and sent him on his way. We don't even know what Jesus did. Did he have anything specific that he did? We don't know. He just took him, said, poof, you're healed, and sent him off. And here's the really interesting thing. Remember what we said about dropsy? Remember how we said that it was very visible? It caused like this bloated look. You were like swollen. if you were healed of a disease that caused you to be bloated, that would instantaneously cause a dramatic change in appearance. Right? The moment this miracle happened, there would be no denying it. None at all. You could claim in certain other instances, well, that guy was probably just acting like a paralytic, or maybe he was faking being blind. You know, I've never seen this man before in my life or anything like that. This guy had a physical condition that was all over him, and the moment Jesus healed him, he would have looked incredibly different. There's no denying that. Yeah. And so then Jesus pulls out. Sorry, go ahead.
You're not done. Keep going, please.
So Jesus then follows that up. Verse 5, he says, he pulls back this statement that he made last chapter when he was talking to the woman that was, bent over. He said, which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on a Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath? Even though it's work, you still won't go and do that. Of course you would. So why wouldn't you want this man who is, dealing with this disease that's incredibly painful to be healed, something that the Sabbath or something that the law does not expressly forbid, except in their tradition? Why is it wrong to do that? And if it isn't, why wouldn't you admit it? Sorry, I do love that gif. Yeah. That's the one thing. They keep thinking they've got him, and he keeps turning it back on them. Every time they up the ante, it just gets worse and worse for him. At some point, they just ran out of options. No matter what they said, they couldn't silence him, so they had to escalate. So yeah, look for that in the days ahead. And says they couldn't reply to these things, which is funny because that leads right into the next thing. As soon as I learn how to do the command. I'm not good at this, guys. I'm sorry. Got to get moving because it's 9:30. Can I get someone to take verses 7 through 11, please?
I'll take it if no one else does.
Go ahead.
Okay. 7 through 11.
Yes, sir.
Now he told a parable to those who were invited, when he noticed how they chose the places of honor, saying to them, when you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down at the place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him. And he who invited you both will come and say to you, give your place to this person, and then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you, for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted.
All right. I really like this parable. This is a fun one. So Jesus is at a feast, at this Pharisee's house. Everybody's been invited, and so Jesus is like, let's tell a story. Let's lighten things up a little bit so that I'm not just constantly berating on the Pharisees, So he tells a parable. He says, so there's this wedding feast that you get invited to. Everybody comes in, and naturally when you come in, so let me kind of back up. Wedding feast was the thing in this time. The wedding feast was like, if you got invited to a wedding feast, you're like, that's my jam. That's like the party. That is the thing that's going to be talked about for like weeks and months after the fact. Wedding feasts were awesome. They like went on for an entire week. Yeah, it's full scale. That was the event. Now, when you went to one of these wedding feasts, it wasn't just like, where we think of there's like we think of weddings now. If you think of a church, you have normally special seating for like the family of the bride or the family of the groom that get to sit up at the front. And it was kind of like that a little bit back in those days, but depending upon who you were, when you got invited, you got assigned, or if you were a person of high prestige or high honor or notoriety within the village or the town, wherever this banquet was happening, you get this really nice seat. And then kind of falling, and then gradually, the more, like the less notoriable or notable people would have seats below. And so there was like this high place of honor closest up to the front. And then gradually you'd work your way back down to just ordinary people that happen to come or invitees. And so when this crowd that here at this Pharisees feast show up, they're all wanting to claim these places of honor because everybody likes to be in the nice, high, important seats, right? That just appeals to our the natural pride in the human mind. We want to be thought of as good and well thought of and respected. And so Jesus notices this and says, "Hang on, let me paint a picture for you here." So when you go to a house, if you pick this really important, this really good seat, this really honored seat, it may be nice when you first get there, but you may come in later, and you may have this person who is a very high-ranking official, that's been invited to this wedding feast, and he rightly, because of his position, deserves that place of honor that you're sitting in. And so the master of the feast will come to you and say, hey, I need this guy to have this seat. He's very important, very special. And so he has earned this seat. It's only right of you to give that up. But again, because everybody else is wanting to claim the best seats, all the other ones have probably been filled in. And so the only ones that are left are probably what we would refer to as the nosebleeds. And so there is tremendous shame in having to sacrifice a place of great honor to a place with very little. And so Jesus says, let me correct your thinking. When you go to a feast, like a wedding feast like this, don't immediately rush for the honor seats, but go in with a sense of humility and meekness and claim a seat. And then you may find that the master of the feast will then exalt you, saying, hey, I see you've taken this seat so far away. You don't have to do that. You're more than welcome to move up and join us up here. And so in that, you move from a place of humility to a place of greater honor. Now, what's the practical application for this? I don't think it's really that complicated. Obviously, the master of the feast in this is, God. And so when we come to a feast, if we seek to honor ourselves and claim spots of honor, then God can humble us. We know that God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And so when we approach in humility, then God will exalt us. And Jesus has spoken of this many times. If you go back to the parable of, or not the parable, but the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, when Jesus talks about the Pharisees, he talks about how they like to, make it a show of things when they give their tithes, or they like to pray and, on the street corners and make a very loud, very visible thing. He says, they have received their reward in full. They're trying to get their reward on their own, and they got it. But God resists those who are proud and seek their own reward. But when you humbly come before God, then he will reward you. And isn't the reward of God, the exalting of God, much greater than anything that we can do on our own?
Mhm.
Okay. Any questions on that? Any thoughts, comments? See Cass here. Do not boast in the presence of the king, and do not stand the same place as great people, for it is better that it be said to you, "Come up here," than for you to be placed lower in the presence of the prince whom your eyes have seen. Huh. That sounds far like exactly like what I said, only far more eloquent and succinct.
I wonder if he is referencing that proverb.
He certainly could be. It lines up a lot. Let me actually. I don't have. I'm running everything off of Bible Gateway. I do want to see. Doesn't say it in the footnote, but if you had a cross reference, where's my King James? Come here. I want to see if it cross references this in my King James. Hello, Proverbs 25, 6 and 7. Linked to verse 10. How about that? So there's a cross reference in my Bible. Yep, there really is. So yeah, I think he's probably drawing upon that, and I assume that the Pharisees would be able to make that connection. But remember, Jesus is saying this to the guests, not to the Pharisees. So the Pharisees would hear it and pick up on what he's saying, but but Jesus is speaking in a parable to these guests. So, that's really good, though. Excellent. Jesus' favorite day. Have you never read? Read a book, people. All right. I know this last one looks a little long. And technically, I guess we can split this one up. Does someone want to read verses 12 through 14? The little first paragraph and what I just linked up. Go ahead, Sir Wise Rat.
Thank you, subscribe. He said also to the man who had invited him, "When you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighborhoods, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just."
I'm easily distracted, and I think I hear a leash being jangling from a doggo in the background. Is that true?
Yeah, I'm sorry. He all of a sudden decided to get really playful right when I volunteered to read.
It is okay. Give him a pat for me.
I will.
All right.
I know when you're thinking about something else.
It's true. So, when I read that passage, I immediately thought of something. And I think there might be only 2 or 3 people here that would remember this. But a number of years ago, the Bible study went through the book of James. And there's a lot of the book of James is this kind of commentary on faith versus works. Which is the, should we exercise more faith or exercise more works? And James comes to the conclusion of, I'll show you my faith by my works. And he talks in one portion about pure religion. Anybody remember this?
I believe I remember it.
Okay. So he talks about pure religion was ministering unto the orphans and the widows. And it was Ongirth that was leading this particular study, and he made he brought out the practical application of this. Because talking about ministering to orphans and widows is one thing, you can take that very literally, which is true. You definitely should. But the greater application was in your ministering, in doing good to others. The purest religion was doing it to people that had nothing to offer you in return. And this is that principle is drawn right from these verses. Now, Jesus isn't saying, whenever you have a don't invite friends and family. Really, I'm not gonna stand here and say that if you invite friends or family to a party, like either a wedding or what have you, that you're doing a bad thing. No, don't take that. But what Jesus is saying here is that you're not really doing anything going out of your way. You're not doing a particularly good deed, because any of these people can just repay the favor. They can just turn around and be like, hey, this guy was nice to me that one time, let me be nice to him. If you really want to show how godly, how compassionate, how merciful, how much God dwells within you and his love for your fellow man dwells within you, do it for people that can't give anything back, that have nothing to show but their thanks, their gratitude. You do that out of a heart of compassion and love from God himself. That's pure religion. That making sense? Practice true hospitality, not just social climbing. Yep. That was a really good study by Ongirth. Also, on the Ongirth front, no kids yet. We're still waiting.
What?
I keep seeing pictures. She's at 36 weeks.
I seem to remember in that
Okay.
study someone mentioning the passage about if you only love those who love you.
Mm-hmm. And what reward do you receive? That's Sermon on the Mount as well. Excellent. All right. Now for the fun one. How about verses 15 through 24? The second paragraph in that little bundle.
You said 15 through 24?
Yes, sir.
I can read it.
Thank you, sir.
When one of those who reclined at the table with him heard these things, he said to him, Blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God. But he said to him, A man once gave a great banquet and invited many. And at the time for the banquet, he sent his servant to say to those who had been invited, Come, for everything is now ready. But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said to him, I have bought a field, and I must go out and see it. Please have me excused. And another said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I go to examine them. Please have me excused. And another said, I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come. So the servant came and reported these things to his master. Then the master of the house became angry and said to his servant, Go out quickly to the streets and lanes of the city, and bring in the poor and crippled and blind and lame. And the servant said, Sir, what you have commanded has been done, and still there is room. And the master said to the servant, Go out to the highways and the hedges, and compel people to come in, that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those men who were invited shall taste my banquet.
Thank you. So there's a bunch here in this one. First things first, I didn't think that when we started the study in the book of Luke that one of the themes that would come up over and over again are poor, innocent, well-meaning bystanders who would say something and then immediately trigger like a monologue from Jesus. This has happened so many times where somebody just says something and Jesus is like, that's a good point. Let's follow that one. These guys, you gotta wonder, do they know what they were getting into? So this poor guy, he says, "Blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God." You know what? Did this guy say anything wrong or anything bad?
Nope.
I would agree. I don't think he said anything wrong. However, Jesus seizes an opportunity because we have the idea of the kingdom, and it's a real thing, and there will be people who will eat bread within the kingdom. But not everybody gets in. And this paints a picture of Jesus here. So, we have this, so a little bit more on, we've talked about wedding feast a little bit. So, there is this idea of the wedding feast. Now, in Jewish society, when it came to the wedding feast, the date of the wedding feast was known. Like the groom would announce when the wedding feast would be held. So, let's say that there's this groom and he's getting married on October the 10th. Because, that's how Jews counted the calendar. But let's say it was the October the 10th. And so he would say, "Hey, October the 10th, I'm going to have a wedding feast. Can you come?" And he would invite all these people and be like, "Sure." And he's like, "Cool." And they'll be like, "What time?" And he's like, "I'm not telling you till the day of." That's how Jewish wedding feasts work. Which is why when a lot of these different parables, Jesus commonly uses the ideology of like a bridegroom comes, you never know the time because the bridegroom doesn't announce it till it's happening. So everybody knows like the date, you're looking forward to it, but the exact moment when it happens, you don't know. It's just when the announcement goes out, he's like, "Hey, everybody come in, we're going to party, starts now." And so we have this wedding feast that's about to happen. And so the groom says, "Hey, servant, why don't you go out and all these people that I invited, let them know that the feast is happening now. Everything's ready. We got the table prepared. We got food. We got my bride's here. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be awesome. Have everybody swing on by, and we're gonna get this party started." So the servant's like, "Cool." So he goes out and he goes to find all these people. He's got the wedding list, the list of all the invitees, and he goes out to each one, and then they start doing this thing that was really unusual at best, and downright insulting at worst. Because if you got invited to a wedding feast, you were to some degree, a guest of honor. You were deemed close enough to the family or someone of great enough importance to be invited. Not everybody was invited. So to turn it down would have been, culturally very insensitive, save for the most extreme of situations. So let's take a look at some of these reasons that these guys give for not coming or not being able to attend the feast. So the first guy, he says, "Hey, so listen, I just bought a field, right? Okay, just bought a field, and I need to I got to go and see it. So I asked that I be excused." Is this a good excuse?
Is the field going anywhere?
Most fields that I have encountered have generally stayed in the same spot.
Okay, good to know.
That's in my experience. I'm not necessarily the best gardener, but there are a lot of fields around where I work. A lot of open areas. There's a field that has like an airport in it, not far, and that field is still there. It hasn't moved in my 30 years of living in this area. So most of the time, I feel like fields will generally retain their Yes.
It's happened.
If you bought a field and then you go to bed and then you wake up the next morning and your field is gone and it's wet outside, you didn't buy the field, you bought the Pacific garbage patch. Okay, so first one, probably not a good excuse. That field's not going anywhere. How about the second guy? Says, I just bought 5 yoke of oxen, so 10 oxen. It's a 2 per yoke, so 5 yoke of oxen, and I need to go and prove them. It says my King James in the ESV. How does it phrase it? I'm sorry, I'm having to switch back to few Bibles. I need to go examine them. Please have me excused. Is this a good excuse?
I'm a terrible business person who doesn't look at things before he buys them.
Good. That's a point. That's one point I want somebody to pick up on. Good for you. So these guys are saying, listen, I bought something. I need to go check it out. Did you not take a look at it before you bought it? Seems to me like in this day and age, maybe we don't take a close look at things before we buy it because it's on the internet and as close as we can get is the monitor on our screen. But 2,000 years ago, that wasn't exactly an issue, especially when you were buying a field or beasts of burden. This is basically buying 5 tractors. What are you doing? Okay, then there's the third guy who says, I've married a wife, and therefore I cannot come. Is this a good excuse? I understand that the whole concept is that of an invitation, but yeah, maybe this is my Western mind speaking, but why wouldn't you just bring her along? Oh my gosh, it's just like, and this is the fun one. The first two, it says, "Please have me excused," right? Or in the ESV it says, "Yeah, please have me excused." The third guy says, "I've married a wife, and so I can't come." He doesn't say, "Please have me excused." He's like, "I can't come because I got a wife now." Who's wearing the pants in this relationship? Excuse me? Oh yeah. So, consensus. How, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are these excuses? Yeah, not great. It's pretty rough. Pretty rough. So the servant goes back to the master, and he says, "Hey, so this is what they said." And so the master of the house rightfully became angry. He invited all these people. They accepted the invitations to the date that he gave them, even though they didn't know the time. He said, "This is the time where we're gonna have it. So this is the day it's gonna happen. You guys, when I'm ready for you, I'll send out the invitations, and you guys just come to my house." They had agreed upon this, and remember, the wedding in Jewish society was the deal. That was the thing. And so these guys, not only are they turning this down, they go and claim that they've bought these things and have reason to go. If you knew the date of the feast, why would you be going and doing things that could interfere with that scheduled appointment? So it's no wonder that the master is angry. So he says to him, "Now go out quickly to the streets and the lanes that are in the city, and bring in the poor and the crippled and the lame. Anybody you can find, bring them in to my house. All right? So the servant's like, okay. So he goes out and he finds everybody that he can, brings them into the house. And so he's there, and so the servant comes back, and he's got all these people that initially weren't invited, but now are in the house. And he says, listen, sir, I went out and did what you told me, and there's still room for people. The master's, well, I guess we didn't go far enough out. So go outside the city, go to the highways and the hedges, the byways, all these roads out as far as you can go reasonably, and look for people. Compel people, urge them to come in, because I will not suffer that my house is not filled. And he says, I tell you, none of those who are invited shall taste my banquet. So what is this referencing? What is Jesus trying to convey with this parable? Because remember, a parable is an earthly story conveying heavenly truth.
We've all been invited to heaven. Anyone who disregards the invitation will not be let in.
Mm. Go ahead, Kes.
So I have a story that's a little bit like this.
Story time.
You remember after Phoebe and I had been kicked out,
Mhm.
a few months later, we left Texas and we went and stayed at a La Quinta Inn.
Mhm.
And the lady in front of us was giving the staff at the desk a really hard time. She was just obnoxious, complaining about her and blah, blah, blah. So they moved her, and we had waited patiently. So we just stepped up to the desk and said, hi, thank you. No, we don't mind to wait. And the lady looked at us and said, she just vacated a queen-sized room, and it's really nice, and it's right here. I'm giving it to you. And so
Nice.
we got a much bigger room than we had budgeted for, just because we were polite and courteous.
Yeah. I think I remember hearing
Someone
that
else
story from back when that happened.
Yep.
Being
So-
nice and courteous goes a long way.
It does. As someone who works retail, it really does.
Yeah, I actually gave someone a much larger discount today than I was supposed to. Like, I'm allowed to give a 10% discount at my store.
Mhm.
And I gave them a 53% discount just because they
Jeez.
were my... Well, it was this little girl who came in, and apparently she had seen this dress earlier but didn't get a chance to see the price, and she left to get money, and then she came back and she had $4, and turns out the dress was $8, and she was very polite. She's very nice, and she was well spoken for, like, an 8-year-old.
Mhm.
And so she didn't even ask for a discount. She just kind of went,
Oh.
that kind of a deal. And I went, what if I gave you a discount? And so I brought it up, and 53 brought it out to like $4.03. And I'm like, okay, I can do that.
Nice.
I was like, here, yeah, you can have it. And my mother came in the store later, and she saw her walking away with it. And apparently the little girl had this huge smile on her face just walking down.
Oh.
And I also felt okay doing it because it was one of the daughters of the, like, 2 stores down from us. There's a hair salon. It was the owner of that's daughter. And so I'm like, okay, I can also do it for that. But anyway, sorry.
All right, so I do want to kind of, because something that's not been brought up, and I was wondering if you guys would necessarily see this. So when Jesus, as he's telling this parable, when the servant goes out initially to go invite those guys that gave the excuses, where did he go? The people that were invited, where were they at? The implication culturally was that they were in the city. You know, those were the people that were invited to these wedding feasts. They were people who were notable within wherever you lived. After all of these guys gave their excuses, the master tells the servant to go out again, and where does he tell him to go? He tells him out in the streets of the city, streets and lanes of the city. And then the servant comes back and says, hey, I got everybody that I could, and it's still not full in here. And then he tells him, where does he say to go then? Yeah, he says, get outside of the city. Leave the city. Go out in highways that are out of the bounds of where we are, and look for people there. And Cass has picked up on what Jesus is saying here. Jesus presents himself as the Messiah to the nation of Israel. God is the master of the house. And he says, hey, I got my son. He's got his bride. He's going to have this awesome wedding feast. The servant, all these guys that I invited, this nation that I've called my own, that I've drawn to myself, go out and gather them together. And the nation of Israel had all kinds of excuses why they couldn't come, why they wouldn't come. And the servant comes back, and God says, all right, fine. Let's go get some people that aren't as high and mighty, don't have necessarily as prestigious a legacy, a lineage. Let's get people who are fishermen, tax collectors, zealots, ordinary people. Not the high class of society, not the ones who would naturally think to be ones that would sit in the places of honor at a wedding. Go find whoever you can. Those who are crippled and lame and blind. It doesn't matter that they are. My son can deal with that. Bring them into my house. Those that will come. So the servant goes out and brings them. He comes back and says, look, Lord, I've brought who I could find. But the house isn't full yet. And he says, all right, fine. Then let's go outside. Let's go look for people that aren't of this city, that aren't of our home here, and bring them in. And if they'll come, they are welcome in my house. Exactly. This is really, in the book of Luke, the first time that Jesus mentions, again, in parable, the idea that the Messiah would come from more than just the Jews. This is where you and I, because I'm pretty sure perhaps I'm just, extrapolating my own situation, but I think all of us here, I would assume, are Gentiles. I don't think there are any Jews in our group, and you don't have to say if you are. But this is where the first time that Jesus says, "All right, I see how it is. This is the situation. I'm going to draw some people from Israel to myself." And we know that he did. He had his disciples. We know that he had a number of followers because we know that there was a house on the day of Pentecost that was full of people, and that's where the little tongues of flame came from, and that the church gathered from the Jews initially. They were preaching in Jerusalem. It wasn't until the Macedonian call that we finally get to see Gentiles start to come to the picture, but this is where Jesus first starts talking about it in the book of Luke. And I don't think any coincidence that this immediately follows the end of 13, where Jesus stands outside of Jerusalem looking down and it's Jerusalem. I would have gathered you unto myself like a hen gathers her chicks, but you would not. He said, I tried and I tried and I appealed to you over again, and you just wouldn't have it. So fine. I think it's at that moment that Jesus says, I see that Israel is rejecting me as Messiah. And it's like, okay, then we'll start incorporating some sheep that aren't of this flock. What do you guys think? Do you guys think?
That's a dangerous question.
Like I said, I really like this passage. This is a fun one where it has some stuff. The whole idea of healing on the Sabbath, and then the whole idea of, you know, the introduction of the idea of the Gentiles as being part of Messiah's plan. All this stuff starts to culminate into a new theme in the book of Luke that hasn't really come up before.
Okay, I just peeked ahead to the next chapter.
Next chapter, we're not even done with 14.
She's cheating.
Cheater! Cheater!
Wait. What's next? Oh, okay. Yeah, there's more. Okay, but the beginning of chapter 15, it says all the tax collectors and sinners are drawing near to hear him, and it made the Pharisees and the scribes mad. It's like it's already coming true.
Uh-huh. All right. You guys awfully quiet, flabbergasted. Or maybe you just caught everything on the first time. Yeah. I love the way that it's described, that he says, go to the lame, the blind, the poor. Because that's what Jesus has been doing the whole time. He goes out in the streets and he's been appealing and talking to the Pharisees. The Pharisees were some of the first ones that got noticed because they were out, checking out John. They got the alert. And Jesus shows up, and then that's when they start making excuses. Remember? They're like, by the power of Beelzebub, this man casts out demons. And he breaks the law. He breaks the Sabbath by doing work on it. And he breaks with our tradition. He's no true rabbi. He's not a true teacher of the law. And all these excuses for why they couldn't accept him for who he was supposed to be, for who he said he was. And he said, all right. And he did what he said. What he advised the Pharisee whose house he was in. Remember, he told him. He said, when you invite people, don't invite your friends and family. Those people that can pay you back. Invite those that can't. And then Jesus gives a parable where that's exactly what happens. Really fun. All right. Any closing comments from you guys?